ก่อนอื่นแนะนำสำหรับฝ่ายเสนอกันก่อนวันนี้มี2ท่านด้วยกันนะคะท่านแรกปรบมือต้อนรับคุณสกุลพัฒน์เอี่ยมเสมอเชิญค่ะและอีกหนึ่งท่านฝ่ายเสนอนะคะคุณปัณวิทย์คงวุฒิปัญญาเชิญค่ะวันนี้ฝ่ายเสนอเปลี่ยนไปก็คือเป็นผู้ชาย2คนนะคะรอบนี้ฝ่ายค้านบ้างคุ้นหน้าคุ้นตากันดีกับลีลาที่ไม่ธรรมดาต้อนรับฝ่ายค้านคนแรกคุณวริศลือวณิชพันธ์และตามด้วยเพชรกิจชเอกชัยค่ะแน่นอนวันนี้เรามีผู้ดำเนินการโต้วทีด้วยนะคะต้อนรับนิรุตติจารุไพศาลเกตค่ะช่วงนี้พี่ออสมอบให้กับนิรุตติเลยเพราะว่า1 ชั่วโมงเต็มนี้หลายๆท่านอาจจะฟังแล้วเอ๊ะยังไงลีลาขนาดไหนเดี๋ยวฟังเขาก่อนหลายท่านฟังเสียงแล้วอาจจะรู้สึกว่าอุ๊ยน่าตื่นเต้นนะคะเชิญนิรุตติค่ะ
ขอบคุณครับสวัสดีครับผมนิรุตติจารุไพศาลกิจชื่อเล่นชื่อไทม์นะครับเป็นผู้จัดการทีมโต้สาระวาทีภาษาอังกฤษแห่งประเทศไทย Thailand National Debate Team รวบรวมและคัดเลือกนักเรียนระดับมัธยมที่ไม่ว่าจะอยู่ในโรงเรียนรัฐบาลเอกชนหรือนานาชาติเพื่อเข้าร่วมการแข่งขัน World School Debating Championship รายการใหญ่ประจำปีซึ่งเทียบได้กับเป็นโอลิมปิกของวงการดีเบตครับโดยน้องๆทุกคนเนี่ยด้วยฟอร์แมตของโอลิมปิกหรือว่า World School นี้ก็จะมีเวลาพูดคนละ8 นาทีครับวันนี้น้องๆจะมาจำลองการโต้สาระวาทีหรือที่เรียกว่า Exhibition Debate ในหัวข้อ This House believes that climate change adaptation should be prioritized over mitigation กล่าวคือการปรับตัวต่อการเปลี่ยนแปลงทางสภาพภูมิอากาศสำคัญกว่าการบรรเทาครับเพื่อไม่เป็นการเสียเวลาขอเสียงตบมือให้กับน้องๆทั้ง4ท่านเลยครับโอเคโอ้ย
Flood kills thousands yearly, agricultural system collapse under drought, and millions are displaced without a resilient infrastructure because of extreme climate and extreme disaster, that there's a lack of structural response to it. Proposition aim to help this and help the most vulnerable people on the ground. I'll forward 3 points of setup, then 1 substantive on why we help the most vulnerable people on the ground, and love weighing on why this is the most important case. First thing in setup then on what the status quo world looks like. 2 things. 1, the world is already locked into a severe climate change impact due to past emission. That is to say, even if we cut emission today to 0, decades long of rising temperature, floods, and sea levels will not stop and will still inevitably grow. Second point of setup, a second thing under this then, we point to countries in the global south that are structurally unprepared for disaster and immediate aids. These are the most important actors because they are the one experiencing the current effect of climate change, that it was them who are being displaced, that it was them whose houses are being taken down by these natural disasters that are in a way caused by these climate change. Second point of setup then, our proposition comparative looks like. I think climate change adaptation looks like 2 things. 1, in terms of infrastructures, we build things like seawalls, storm drains, or irrigation systems that help the most vulnerable in terms of crops, and then help with things like famine in the first place. But second thing under this is that they look like things like urban planning, things like cyclone shelters, or heat shelters also for those people. What then does the opposition comparative look like? I think the premise of mitigation lies on the fact that they, yes, attack the root cause of these things, but it takes an insanely long time to actually deal with the issue and then how the impact manifests into the real world. Because even if we implement things like carbon tax right now, it took 20 years and not in even 50 years for it to actually manifest to people on the ground. It looked like 4 things then, the comparative. 1, things like energy transition, things like through investment of private firms, and then there's also things like state institution, or whether it's things like transportation system, green technologies, or things like economic transition then. I'll forward one argument under this on why we protect the most vulnerable actor. 3 points under this. 1, given our best case that even if they are able to prove that things like mitigation is a success, disaster in the next 30 to 50 years are inevitable, that people will die because of these things when we prioritize mitigation. People's homes will be displaced because of floodings and because of the rising temperature that they cannot sustain anymore. That is the reality they have to defend, and I think it's structurally true that it exists. Secondly, then, adaptation is localized and decentralized to the specific crisis. We point to seawalls in Bangladesh, heat shelters in India, or irrigation system in sub-Saharan Africa. These are unique instances of these climate change effects that affect nuancedly into each different regions of the world. We need this kind of adaptation uniquely under outside the house to help each specific groups of vulnerable actors that we help. Thirdly, then, I think adaptation is very much politically attractive because it is visible and it calls for immediate results. Meaning there's much more incentive for people like politicians to push out better policy and more effective policy under outside the house, because there are much more political capital for people to see and vote for things that have clear results. I think the impact is clear, that we stop things like forced displacement, famine, and things like extreme hunger that will exist because of these issues that continues to perpetuate under opposition world. Meaning we get things like economic benefit because things like economy are not stunned by this stop and these floodings. Before I go on, I'll take a point.
Water from floods is going to be in the same quantity on both sides of the house. Where are you going to put all that water?
I think there are structural things and things like better infrastructure or a stronger irrigation system that already protects things like floods or the failure of things like draining system. That is the problem right now. I think when we put more money to it, there is a way and there is a solution that we can always research on. Next then, on opposition comparative, we tell you that they will never reach the people on the ground. The reality is mitigation is a narrative of the privileged, because when you look at policies like carbon tax or energy transition, the countries that actually is effective doing so is one that are rich enough or have stable enough economy to even tax in the first place, or even to do things like energy transition. You need stable economy and stable energy industry insofar that you are able to kind of transition into a green energy system. I think this is magnified by the fact that developing countries already has limited political capitals to environmental policies because they have other more urgent issues to deal with. Things like medical institution or things like economic issue that have more political capital that exist. Meaning I think it's worse on opposition when they are unable to help the most vulnerable people on the ground. I'll forward 3 points of weighing then. 1, even if you want to talk about long-term, adaptation stall times for technological progress to catch up for the severe harm of climate change. That is to say, we tell you that things like technological progress in its exponential growth will in a way catch up by the moment we already save people on the ground. Second of all, even if opposition can prove that they have more net benefit, the state obligations are still higher towards the most vulnerable people and not the net benefit that exists. And this is for 4 reasons. First, I think how state legitimacy exists is that they derive legitimacy from voting and democratic institutions, and that is how these things like the social contracts work, where these states derived active agency from the people by the fact that people and live citizens right now are voting for them, and that is when they get the legitimacy. Meaning it was not the future generation who votes for them. Therefore, I think the conclusion of this is that the higher obligation of these states is to the one that vote for them and the one that give legitimacy to the existence of state in the first place. The second reason under this is that the states owe reparation to the vulnerable and the poorest of the world, because one, wealth is transgenerational, that in a way it was the state failure and the refusal to give enough welfare or give enough social mobility for these people to get out of poverty in the first place, meaning it was their fault that they are unable to help themselves. So in a way, I think it was proportional for them to prioritize these people right now. Secondly, then, the poor and the most vulnerable are being affected more by the force of the state. Even if we want to talk about things like state policies, like environmental policy, like carbon tax, or even things like adaptation, or the police force itself, these people are able to shield themselves from the state force way less because they have fewer resources to choose to and shield themselves because of lack of alternative that exists for these people and for these people on the ground. The last reason then is that I think democracy is on the premise of equality in the first place. That if they want to talk about that, oh, net benefit achieve equality for everyone, the premise of equality is that one man deserves one vote in the first place, meaning I think equality, equity, and in those sorts is prerequisite to the principle of democracy, meaning in a way, I think the fact that these people already have lack of infrastructure and lack of the ability to help themselves give enough reason for the state to prioritize them under the premise of equality. I think for all of these reasons, proposition.
I thank the first proposition for the speech. Next, I would like to invite the first opposition to open the opposition's case. Here.
Hello. What their side claims to be doing is focusing on the now, focusing on the problems they're seeing at this very moment. And they say that, sure, climate change has already been done, people are already suffering, but we say that if we don't stop this, the suffering will continue. And even if we adapt, even if we do everything in our power to reduce the suffering right now, in the future, the suffering will always be even worse. Okay, look at what we are doing right now here. What they want to do right now is to what they're saying is they're helping the most vulnerable people here. They're helping the people who are affected by floods, helping people who are affected by climate change right now. And I'm questioning one thing is, can they really do that? Can they really help the most vulnerable people? Can they really help everyone equally? People, these policies and these resources, it takes a lot of resources and a lot of money. And where do you think the mitigation and the adaptation and the prevention, where would it happen? I think it would happen where it will have the most benefit, and it will have the most benefit for society as a whole. So that means protecting a lot of people, protecting cities, protecting areas with a lot of development, a lot of infrastructure. But that means there's still some people. There's a lot of people in the world who are still vulnerable, people in the world who are still not taken care of by their policy over here. And not just the people, but nature as a whole as well. Don't forget here that we are not the owners of this world. We are living here with the world. We are living here with nature, and we have an obligation to take care of nature. And right now, we have caused so much problems already. I don't think we should continue to cause that much more problems. Because at the end of the day, I'm trying to prove that adaptation will cause problems, or it will not solve them. I think our obligation here is not only to the people of the current status quo or the people who are affected right now, but it's to the people and to the safety of humanity as a whole and to the safeguard of nature's environment. I think we have an obligation to do that. Okay, let's back to the set. I'm here. I agree with them that climate change is a continuing problem, that it has been a problem for many years now, and just stopping right now wouldn't solve it immediately. But we have already done steps to solve it, and it is already working. Mitigation is working. Growth in carbon dioxide emission has slowed in a lot of countries, and many countries are already declining. Renewable energy is already cheaper than fossil fuel energy right now, and the EU has cut emissions by already 30% since 1990. And China is now the biggest investor in renewables. I think we are already on pace to solve climate change right now, but their side is actively promoting against that. And we have limited time to save the earth. Maybe it's 100 years, maybe it's 200 years. If we do not solve the problem at its core is that we are emitting too much carbon dioxide gases, the world will be even worse and even worse. It will not stop. Even if we adapt, even if we build these flood defenses, these drought-resistant crops, eventually the earth will flood too much to even where these walls won't be able to prevent it. Or maybe the world's climate will be in such a blast place that even though the most drought-resistant crops won't even be survivable. So I think what we're doing here is that we are focusing on the long-term products. Yeah, we're focusing on the long-term end goal that we are actually trying to save humanity, and they're just focusing on the right now and focusing on the small parts. Okay, onto my first argument is that the adaptation is inherently harmful to the environment. adaptation here is to, its goal is to reduce property damage or reduce damage to human, right? But what does this look like? They say they're building flood walls, they're building better crops, but have they really looked at what doing this will actually done for their lives and what actually done it for nature? And the problem here is they're ignoring the root cause, which is too much carbon dioxide gases, and they're fixing at the end cause, which by the end of the day, the problem will get much worse, and it will not get better, and it will need more resources to fix. So the problem will get worse. We need more resources to fix it, and it's a never-ending cycle of vicious nature destroying stuff. But another thing is that even though we are doing this, it's not guaranteed to fix. It can cause some other problems. Look at flood defenses, for example. If we build flood barriers, 5 meters tall flood barriers, that's how many tons of metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions. And when the problem gets worse, when the seas get higher, that's even more, and it doesn't stop. Or maybe the drought-resistant crops, have they considered that one day maybe these crops will fail? And what do we do then? We have engineered these crops to feed us, but the crops we engineered is failing, and nature cannot provide for us, and we cannot provide for ourselves. What does that leave for humanity? It leaves nothing. And at the end of the day, is that these adaptations, they have no guarantee that they're going to solve it, and they have a guarantee that they're going to be even worse for nature overall. And one other point is that by these climate change adaptations, it's point-specific solving. It's only solving if there's a flood. We're putting flood barriers. If we don't have food, we are producing new crops. But that's only one part of the problem. There's so much more problems in the world. There's nature, there's everything in nature that is at risk right now, and we're only solving the specific problems. And do you really think we have enough resources to solve everything in the world right now? Sure, maybe some countries can afford to build flood walls high enough to push away seawater, but how about the countries in the Pacific Ocean, the countries who are at risk at going down right now? Do they really have enough resources to do that? Or do they have enough resources to ensure that in the future when the problem gets worse, they have enough food to feed their citizens? Or do they have enough resources to ensure that even though humanity survives, Earth survives with us as well? If we're only the one living in Earth right now, is it really a worthwhile trade-off in the future that people are living alone and the nature is already destroyed by our own hands because we refuse to solve what the problems we have already created? Another point is that it creates a narrative for other actors in society to do the same thing as well. If we choose to support climate mitigation, other parts of society, maybe the big companies, maybe individual consumers, they also believe that climate change can be solved and we will be able to solve it. But if we prioritize on protecting and adapting, what this creates is an environment of peer protection and peer running away from the problem. That's that we're just thinking climate change cannot be solved, and we only can mitigate it. I think that's a very bad way to run things because scientists have already proved that climate change can be solved, and we have already been on track to solve it. By prioritizing mitigation over here, by prioritizing adaptation, I think it's actively counteracting our efforts to have a sustainable Earth in the future overall. Adaptation may help us survive today, panel, but it will not save us from extinction tomorrow. Proud to oppose. Thank you.
All right, I thank the first opposition for the speech. Next, I would like to invite the second proposition. Here.
Government opposition failed to realize that if they prioritize mitigation throughout the whole problem that we're facing, they're essentially wasting their funding, and these funding are being taken away from the people because they're not trying to reduce the very preventable disaster. Panel, we're making sure of one thing, that life of the people is a matter of urgency, and whatever we can do, a little single bit that we can save human, we're willing to do. What opposition is doing is completely neglecting the lives of human and basing their case on an unpredictable outcome, and I'll later tell you why in my rebuttals then. Few points of clarification here then. Panel, the only thing they gave us on their little adaptation case was that if we prioritize adaptation, we have a future that's gonna be great. Without any mechanization, we think this is not true on two bases. Firstly, adaptation, it needs a unionized nation. That is to say that you can't only rely on one nation working. You need every single nation to cut carbon emission, every single nation to try to stop a certain things. So if you only prioritize one thing, that is not achievable. We see that nowadays, everything is very unpredictable to an extent that we're willing to trade that off to save the lives of multiple people in our side of the house. Second layer here then is the fact that mitigation does not require all of this manpower or all of this unionization. Two things. Firstly, mitigation, we can create things right now. We can only use one side of the government and help the people right now, which is exactly the urgency and the point of the debate, which we're trying to prioritize the most vulnerable actor in this debate. Moving on to rebuttals here then.
Point.
Two rebuttals. Firstly, can we really achieve helping people? But secondly, on the mitigation point, right? Firstly, they try to claim two things on how we can't really help everyone and how we're not protecting the vulnerable people. We see this not being true on two layers. Firstly, on the fact that we're basically helping people even on the least, right? We can help people by creating floodgates. We can help people by helping shelters and benefit them much more, rather than trying to help put this money elsewhere and trying to make it to an unpredictable future that this money, and this is essentially not helping the people throughout the status quo right now. Second thing here then is they try to claim that mitigation essentially slows down the environmental damage. Sure, we completely agree with this, but this is not the best way to solve the problem right now, right? Mitigation, sure, it slows down things, but that is in the trade-off of not helping people that is actually helpable, right? Adaptation, we can clearly help people that are in need of shelters, for example, or those crops that are very preventable. We see that our adaptation way, we're essentially helping people right now and benefiting them right now. But on a second layer here then, on the fact that we think that in the future, mitigation is still possible. Why? We see that technological advances, it advances throughout time, and we see throughout the years, we see technological advancing at having a lot of advancement to an extent that it is able to mitigate all these all these natural disaster causes, and we see that we can essentially protect people, and in the long term, we can also slow down the thing that they're trying to protect. Before I move on, I'll take your point.
Wouldn't prioritizing mitigation and prioritizing these technologies in the first place, wouldn't that lead to more technological innovation and lead to faster solvency of this issue?
No, yes, but no, right? Yes, in a sense that sure, if we prioritize things now, a lot of things will be good in the future and technological advances will happen, but that is in the trade-off of killing people and not helping people that are in need. That is the trade-off that government is not willing to take. When we are able to help the people, we see that we will help the people first, and technological advances, there are a lot of other departments and other ways that technological advances can be achieved, and we see that that is the only way, that is the perfect that we can settle for a perfect future, right? Now, moving on to my arguments here then, on the points of preventing economic collapse and poverty traps, right? Three layers of analysis here then. Firstly, on the household level, right? Panel, we see that floods, storms, or droughts, nowadays they're destroying farms, homes, and farmland, or even local businesses, hence making these families lose their income, lose their assets. And they will be forced to borrow from things, and they will be forced to sell things. Therefore, this creates a long-term poverty that they're not trying to solve. While on our side panel, we are trying to do two things. Firstly, raising storms or a house that prevents these irrigations and have storm-resistant crops, meaning that they don't have to lose everything in the first place, meaning they don't have to lose a lot of things when these disasters happen, and therefore increasing the quality of life. The impact here then is that families are now very stable. They keep their kids in school, maintains livelihoods, instead of sliding into long-term poverty that they're not trying to solve. We're not trying to leave people hanging and waiting for an unpredictable future that their side is not giving a mechanism mechanization of how it is predictable and how it's guaranteed. And before I move on, yeah.
Do you plan on just building more houses and higher seawalls when the problem eventually and inevitably get worse in the future?
Sure, even if we take it on the best that we don't have the resources to do so, we still see that it's using our very limited resources to help people to a certain extent, rather than putting this very limited money into trying to advance technological things that is not very achievable. The comparative here then is that we help people even in the minimal, but their side is trying to base it on a very basic, very unpredictable and unpromised technological advance. Second layer here then on the national economy, right? Each disaster, it damages infrastructure, supply chains, and slow GDP growth. It discourages investment, and if this repeats, it essentially means that development is never gonna be able to go fast, and econ stays stuck at a very low rate. We see that they are not recognizing this fact, and we see that on our side, we're trying to protect this, and we can have more GDP growth on our side where we don't have to spend so much on a reoccurring event, so much on disaster happening nowadays. The impacts then is that countries are then not having to spend on repeated events and not having to spend a lot of money, and this way money can be displaced somewhere else. For example, helping these households, helping these families that are in need, right? And lastly here then, on government finances. The disasters force governments to spend billions at relief and rebuilding, right? This drains budgets and increases debt. Therefore, if we already have a preventable measures, it already ensures that we will not be losing money. It ensures that we can use this money to help people, to prevent disasters, and then government can stay solvent, they can plan for development, and they are less reliant on foreign aid, and they can rely on their own. Panel, the impact on our side is very clear since first speaker, right? We're trying to achieve the one sole thing that is the most important thing, the right to life, where we're trying to help every single one of them survive. If we have the chance, every single trade-off for life of human is worth it, and we see that even with the limited resource, we're able to help one or two, but it's better than putting it into a technological advances and still not have a promised future for these people. And with all these reasons, never been prouder to propose.
I thank the second proposition for the speech. Next, to end this debate, I would like to invite the second opposition here.
Hypothetically, if the ceiling is leaking right now, proposition would probably be the type of people who just put duct tape on it, because the harm of a ceiling leaking is you will get wet. The problem side proposition is they fail to acknowledge the very big and underlying problem, which is just the whole climate change movement and the whole climate change issues, and why we just have to solve it. They can't just get away in this debate by neglecting solving the climate change, because over time, as we have seen, it's going to get worse, and they're going to have to spend more and more money until one day they simply cannot adapt to it anymore. That's why we're so proud to oppose. Couple things here then in this debate. Firstly, then just look at like the general characterizations in this debate then. Because on their side of the house, they have a very, very weird framing, as in they're trying to assume that when you try to adapt to climate change, basically people's life is just living like normal and there's like nothing happening. We tell you that even with flood walls and like any sort of technology, if there's a hurricane coming your way, there's simply not a lot a flood wall can do. There might be less flooding, sure, but there's probably going to be damage caused by winds, there's probably going to be damage caused by water, there's probably going to be damage caused by the excess amount of water in your irrigation system anyways. The only thing they do is to make people suffer just a tiny bit less. But we already told you in first that this is one, marginal, but two, this is like just pushing the problem away to the future. Because we have already told you in first, when you do things like invest in like better irrigation system, the fact is the water is still going to be there. The only thing they're trying to do is try to move it somewhere else. They just try to like maybe just disrupt the whole like climate ecosystem, which is literally why like the climate is a problem in the status quo right now. Second thing they could do is like what they're trying to do, like solving like starvation or famine by just putting in like GMO crops to just be more drought resistant. The problem with most of these solutions is that at the end of the day, it's very short-termist. Sure that you might survive this drought, but the next drought you might not because your soil is already so bad you cannot grow anything else. And this is the nature of what they're doing. It's just trying to put duct tape on every single thing without like looking at the big and underlying problem. So what is it exactly that we're trying to do in our side of the house? We tell you that sure, we're not going to find the perfect cure, but we say that when you do mitigation, it means that you're going to suffer less problems in the future. What does this look like? Because when you have less carbon dioxide and less like global temperature rising, it means that there's going to be less severe like weather currents. It means we're going to have less severe storms, that we have to adapt to less, that we have to pay out these people for damages less. And we say that in the long term, on their side, it's like exponential impact. When you have more and more and more problems, it means that you need to adapt more and more. And when the adaptation itself causes more problem to the environment, it means that they're going to have to contend with an exponentially growing problem. The problem here is that you don't have an exponentially growing coffin, not an exponentially growing wallet. It means that at one day, they will simply just run out. What is it exactly that's unique to our world? We say in our world, we'll probably spend the same money that they have to spend so much on a new irrigation system or like development of like new like drought-resistant plants to just like do things like subsidize EVs cars, give people education of how to do their industries without like harming the environment as much. And I will explain to you later on why that is uniquely beneficial to our world. And that means that we can cure like the whole global movement without needing 200, 300 years. It might even be done in this century. Before I move on, sure.
Would you be okay with torturing a child for the happiness of 1,000 people in the future?
The thing here is that they are torturing millions of children in the future. And we say that there are probably going to be more people in the future suffering under their world that's currently living in the world right now. So on that weighing, we have like more pleasure in our world over whatever they're trying to do. So then second thing here is then it just move on to like just looking at like how we solve the problem. Because what do you need to solve like global warming in exactly? We see that right now there are already restoration projects such as like growing more trees and like making like soil better by like putting things in it to just like recover soil land. We say that this is an extremely slow process that's gonna get faster in the future, but it is something that's currently happening. The problem in the status quo is that it is simply not enough because however much you're restoring in the status quo is outweighed by how much harm you're doing to it. So we say that on our side of the house, we have to mitigate it to the point where one, we may equal it, or two, even if we cannot equal how much we restore to how much we destroy, we can still limit how much more we destroy. And we say that it is a lot better. It is a lot better because we say we look at how exponentially quickly we are able to do things like putting laws against putting laws that bind companies into building more trees and just doing like climate restoration projects even in the status quo. We say that with this progress already existing, the only thing we have to do is buy ourselves a couple of years, 5 years, 10 years, in order for us to be able to catch up with how much we're restoring to how much we're destroying. This means that in our world, it's going to be a lot quicker for us to start doing projects such as projects like restoration of environment, for us to be able to live in a world back before like the time we would have all the floods, all the famine right now. But even if whatever I say is not true, we say that there is a principal obligation in our side of the house that's stronger than propositions. Why? Because the only people proposition care about is the people living in the global south right now. We say that this is not good for two reasons. One, they neglect the most important group and the most vulnerable group, which is simply animals. We care about animals the same way we care about humans because humans matter, because we have the ability to feel pleasure and pain. We have the ability to just act as an agent. We say that because animals do the same thing, they have to be reserved the same courtesy and the same consideration. And these people do not have a voice to don't have a voice to represent themselves, and they have never have a voice to represent themselves for all of time. If they're gonna try to tell us about people who are being represented, people who are being neglected, we say that these animals are the thing that is more vulnerable than even human beings. But even if they're not more vulnerable, we say there's a lot more of them. Second thing they got wrong here is that Spoom already told you that there are probably still some problems with your adaptation. This looks like if you are trying to not make Bangkok flood because that's gonna be really bad, you probably have to put your water somewhere else else, or you probably have to like screw some like soil to be able to grow drought-resistant crops. This means that the people probably who live outside the cities, who are people who are probably going to be a lot poorer than people who live in cities, are probably going to be people who will be sacrificed by government. And we say that these people are the people who are more vulnerable, who are people who are being screwed by just how the global societal system works. So we say that in our side of the house, we stop harming the people who actually are the most vulnerable in the world over their side. But even if we don't care about all this, we say that the long-term impact and the long-term consideration outweighs everything in this debate. Why? Because in their world, there's simply no way that they're going to reach their end goal of just solving the climate movement. Because on their side of the house, the only thing that they have to wait for is some bizarre technology to just come up in itself, and only then would they be able to reverse anything for them to be able to stop this problem from being bigger and bigger. So for all those reasons, we've already proven to you that on-site government, they have a very small fix, a fix that might work today or tomorrow, but will probably not work by 10, 20 years. It will probably fail, and they probably are just left with even worse than our side of the house. We say that in our side of the house, we actually prove to you on how we solve the climate change movement. And in a debate like this, that is probably the most important considerations, given all the weighings. For all those reasons, opposition.
ขอเสียงตบมือให้กับน้องๆทุกท่านอีกครั้งนะครับแล้วก็ขอบคุณสำหรับเนื้อหาที่เข้มข้นแล้วก็เต็มไปด้วยความคิดสร้างสรรค์นะครับสิ่งที่เราได้ฟังไปเมื่อสักครู่นะครับเป็นมากกว่าคำตอบตายตัวว่ามันควรเป็น adaptation หรือมันควรเป็น mitigation นะครับแต่ว่าเป็นการชวนให้เราคิดต่อมากกว่าตั้งคำถามแล้วมองปัญหาจากหลายมุมอย่างที่เราได้เห็นน้องๆได้ดีเบตกันนะครับว่าปัญหาเนี้ยมันมีมากกว่าเรื่องมนุษย์ไปถึงเรื่องสัตว์และสิ่งแวดล้อมด้วยหรือเปล่ามากกว่าการแก้ปัญหาระยะสั้นและดูถึงผลกระทบระยะยาวด้วยหรือเปล่านะครับถ้าหากทุกท่านสนใจแล้วก็ชอบการดีเบตแบบนี้นะครับผมขอฝากติดตาม Thailand National Debate Team บน Instagram นะครับขอขายตรงแป๊บนึงนะครับก็คือในQR code นี้ได้เลยนะครับแล้วก็ทางเรามีทำเสื้อลายสวยๆแบบที่ผมใส่อยู่นะครับเป็นการ fundraiser เพื่อให้นักเรียนที่อยู่ตรงนี้ได้ไปแข่งระดับประเทศในนามทีมชาติต่อๆไปนะครับโดยที่ปีหน้าเนี่ยปี 2026 เราก็จะมีไปแข่งที่ประเทศเคนยาทวีปแอฟริกากันเลยทีเดียวนะครับทั้งหมดนี้ประมาณนี้ครับขอเสียงตบมือให้กับทีมชาติโต้สารวาทีภาษาอังกฤษแห่งประเทศไทยอีกหนึ่งรอบครับ
ขอบคุณค่ะน้องทามปรบมือกับทั้ง5ท่านด้วยนะคะเดี๋ยวพี่อ๊ตขออนุญาตถ่ายภาพทั้ง5ท่านนะคะอยู่ตรงกลางเลยนี่คือเยาวชนทีมชาติกับ Thailand National Debate Team นะคะที่เป็นหนึ่งในองค์กรไม่แสวงหากำไรเสื้อที่น้องทามใส่อยู่ก็ผู้จัดการทีมนะคะมี2สีด้วยกันสีขาวกับสีดำท่านสามารถอุดหนุนและเป็นหนึ่งในแรงซัพพอร์ตได้แล้วก็ฝากสำหรับผู้ใหญ่ใจดีทุกๆท่านนะคะที่อยู่รอบๆ Exhibition ของเราถ้าต้องการสนับสนุนเรายินดีนะคะสำหรับ Thailand National Debate Team เดี๋ยวกลางเดือนหน้าเขาจะมีการประกวดแข่งขันโต้วาทีอีกครั้งหนึ่งที่โรงเรียนเตรียมอุดมศึกษานะคะขอบคุณน้องทามนักวิชาการทีมนิรุตติจารุภัยสารกิจขอบคุณฝ่ายเสนอด้วยค่ะน้องสกุลพัฒน์น้องปัณณวิทย์และขอบคุณฝ่ายคาดน้องวริศและน้องเพชรกิจนะคะเก่งมาก